the clouds, over the dark night. She reached up to the sky of stars and caught the red-hot light of the North Star.
Good afternoon and welcome. Well, folks, he did it. He told you he was going to do it. And now look at where we are. Trump announced his tariff regime. Some call it a plan. It looks like a mess to me. As Mrs. Francis Geneva would say, that boy done gone and cut a hog now. What impact will this have on globalization? Let's connect some dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is Trump has imposed his tariff scheme. As a result, U.S. stock markets dropped sharply. The U.S. dollar sank more than 2% against the euro, the Japanese yen, and the Swiss franc. And some global leaders are now vowing to retaliate. That's why they call it a trade war. Let's get some insight from my guest. He's a professor of economics emeritus at the University of Massachusetts, Amherst, where he taught economics from 1973 to 2008. He's currently a visiting professor in the graduate program in international affairs of the New School University in New York City. He founded Democracy at Work in 2012. He's the author of a number of books, his most recent being Understanding Capitalism. Dr. Richard Wolff, welcome back.
Dr. Wilmer Leon, it is a pleasure to be talking with you again.
Sir, it is always an honor when you join us. Let's start with a very simple question, but one, whenever we deal with issues like this, I never want to assume that the audience actually understands the terminology being used. And this way we can level set and everybody can understand at least the definitions we're operating from. What is a tariff, and what does President Trump hope to accomplish by imposing these tariffs on our trading partners?
Okay. A tariff is a tax. It happens to be historical that we call this tax not a tax, which is what it is, but a tariff. Earlier in American history, it had a different name. It was called an import tax or an import duty, D-U-T-Y. That would have made it clearer to people what it is. It's a tax, and here's what it's a tax on. Anything that enters the United States because it was produced somewhere else, a bottle of French wine or Japanese electronic equipment or iron ore coming out of a mine in Africa, if it's produced outside the country, but it comes into the United States to be sold to a business or an individual, then it's considered an import, and the tariff is a tax on that import. You only have to pay it if you're produced outside and you're sold inside. What that means, and this is where Mr. Trump often gets it confused, what that means is that the United States government is putting a tax on whoever brings foreign goods or services into the country. So, for example, a wholesale wine dealer who brings in caseloads by ship or plane from France would pay the tariff to Uncle Sam in Washington. It's paid by Americans to the American government. When Mr. Trump used to say, he doesn't do it quite so often now, but he still does it, well, I'm imposing a tariff the Chinese are going to have to pay. You can't impose a tariff on people in other countries. Only their government can do that. The United States government can only tax us, Americans. And a tariff is paid by Americans when they purchase something produced outside the United States. So hopefully that will make it kind of clear. So what happens now is, for example, starting tomorrow morning, any wine dealer bringing French wine, let's say it costs $100 for a case of 12 bottles of wine. Well, tomorrow it'll cost 110 or 120, depending on whether the import tax, the tariff, is 10% or 20%. It'll be more for the shipper. What usually happens is that the dealer who brings wine in bulk will ship it, give it to the retail store, the liquor store where you go to buy it, and the liquor store now having to pay $1.20 or $1.10 for what used to cost $1 will jack up the price some more for you. That's what people mean when they say that in the end, the tariffs will raise the prices of what we get in this country, because imports will immediately go up. But will other prices go up? Sure they will. And the reason is sometimes an import is just a raw material. We don't buy, most of us, coffee beans. What we buy is a brewed cup of coffee. But for that brewed cup, the beans they have to buy, 99% of which come from outside the United States, those are going to be more expensive because of the tariffs imposed on those countries. So now the beans coming in to the wholesaler who sells the beans to your local coffee shop, he's going to have to pay more. He's going to have to pay Uncle Sam the tariff on those beans. So he'll charge more to the coffee shop, which will turn around and hit you right in the pocketbook. Your latte is going to cost more. And then when you remember, the sugar that goes into the coffee, that's another imported item, cane sugar is. Now you're beginning to see, wow. And because there are big tariffs on cars produced in other parts of the world and trucks produced in other parts of the world, their prices is going to go up. But we're still not done. One more step. When the prices of imported goods go up to us, because we've got to pay not just for the good, but the tariff that Uncle Sam demands, or in this case, Uncle Don, here's what happens. The domestic companies, the companies that produce competing goods inside the United States, seeing that their foreign competitors are now more expensive to Americans who have to pay the tariff, will jack up their prices. They almost always do. So even if you're buying something that isn't imported, its price will be pushed up by the imposing of a tax on the imported goods. So the bottom line is, everybody who's not a defender of President Trump is saying that unless something else happens to change the situation, these tariffs are going to make the inflation in America worse. Whatever else they do, they're going to be a burden on the working class here in the United States. And the fact that the president couldn't deal with that, couldn't talk about it, couldn't introduce whatever he might want to do to offset that's a further hint that he's decided that it's worth it for him to take the political gamble, which it is, that people in America will not blame him for the inflation if indeed it comes in the months ahead.
Two of the pro-tariff arguments that I hear, one, Peter Navarro is saying that he expects the tariffs to bring in $6 trillion in revenue in the next decade. Trump said earlier today, standing on the tarmac on his way down to Doral, he said $7 trillion of investment coming into the country. The stocks are going to boom. The markets are going to boom, and our country's going to boom. And so they present this as though they present this as though Nissan importing cars from Japan, that Nissan pays the U.S. Treasury the 20% tax per car, and that somehow that money doesn't really impact the American consumer. That he never seems to get to, oh yeah, I know. The Mercedes that you were looking to buy 2 weeks ago that was $100,000 is now 2 weeks later when you go back to buy it, now that car is going to cost you $120,000. He doesn't seem to connect those two realities.
Yeah, that's political hustle. You know, all I can tell you is Nissan doesn't pay the tariff. The tariff is paid by the company in the United States, which might be Nissan. Nissan might be the company that brings those cars in if Nissan has a subsidiary here.
Nissan America.
Yeah, Nissan America. But it's not the Nissan parent corporation in Japan. It doesn't pay a nickel. Only an American corporation pays a tariff. So let's say it's Nissan. Now Nissan, having to pay all that more, is going to send a quick memo to all the Nissan dealerships in America saying, hey, we now have to pay 20% or 25% or whatever it ends up being more than we used to. So we're going to invoice you, the local dealer in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. We're going to invoice you more. We're going to want to recoup that extra money. We don't want to be out that money. And what is the Nissan dealer? He's a dealer who offers the public Nissan. He has no choice. He can't go anywhere else. He buys from the distributor here in New York or wherever else that distributor is, who brings the Nissans in. So he's stuck. He'll have to pay if he wants to have cars on his lot to show people. And then he'll have to break the news to those people, which you just did. You know, dear person, you should have been here 2 weeks ago, but your president chose to do this thing. Look, there's something really interesting, which I know you will understand real well, Dr. Leon, and that is the Republican Party has made its name over the last century by being the party that is against taxes. It's going to cut your taxes, taxes, endless. So notice, here is the Republican Party imposing an enormous tax on both businesses and consumers, letting the businesses fight it out. How much are you going to bear of this, and how much can you pass on to the consumer? it tells you something is going on when a political party that made its name by being anti-tax is now stuck with imposing an enormous tax. That's part of the reason they like to use the word tariff. They kind of hope, for some people anyway, they won't understand that it's a big, fat tax. And let me take it one step further. Because many items are going to be more expensive, and not by a little. We're not talking 1 or 2%. We're talking 10, 20, 30, 50, the incredible numbers that the president listed there. That's going to really hurt people, because they're going to have to decide, can I afford to pay extra for this, to pay these taxes? Or will I be better off doing without? And now let's see what that means. If people in America decide, okay, I'm not going to buy a new car, it's too expensive, and I'm going to use my old jalopy another 5 years, you're going to see a lot of people lose their job because new cars aren't going to sell. And if they do pay the extra money for the car, that'll be a lot less money they have left to buy anything else. That's why it's important to understand you never know when you impose a tariff what the ramifications will be. When President Trump or Mr. Navarro tell you we're doing this and it's going to have that effect, don't listen to them. I'm telling you, I've been teaching international economics all my life. Every major textbook, every major guide to how to teach that course has a segment on tariffs. They've been around for hundreds of years. And what the science tells us is the impact of a tariff depends on everything else going on. The fact, for example, that Mr. Trump included Myanmar, the country that used to be known as Burma. Myanmar had one of the worst earthquakes in the history of that part of the world a week ago. They can't possibly cope with this. The fact that he hit them in the head with this as well, making it harder for Americans to buy goods that come from there, there's a kind of heartless whacking of the world that Mr. Trump is engaged in. And maybe he thinks that appeals to the American people. But I'm here to tell you, the whole rest of the world sees this in a different way. America is having economic problems, big ones, and it's decided to handle them by accusing the rest of the world. Notice how often Mr. Trump said, the foreigners have been doing this to us. The foreigners have been. This is whining as if you're some kind of victim. You've been the top dog in the world, the U.S. has, for the last 50 years. You've got no way to play that game, but he tried it because he's appealing to an American audience and hopes they buy the idea that the difficulties of this country are not the problems of this country, but rather the nasty cheating that foreigners have subjected us to.
I want to get to that cheating issue in just a second. One or two more points, please, just to clarify. So when Peter Navarro says $6 trillion is coming into the American Treasury over the next 10 years, when Donald Trump says $7 trillion of investment is coming into the United States, is he wrong or is he being disingenuous?
You're very kind. You are a kind man. I know that anyway, but you are.
Or is he lying?
That's about, you're getting closer now. You're getting warmer.
You're getting a damn liar.
Yes, you keep going. You got a ways to go yet. So let me explain. First, Mr. Navarro, he's a fellow economist, and all I can say politely is I'm ashamed to have to say that. But in any case, he's a fellow economist. First of all, if $6 trillion come in to the United States Treasury, let me make it clear to you, that's not enough to solve the problems this country has. Number one. Number two, let's be sure we understand that $6 trillion coming into the government that wouldn't have come in except for the tariffs that the president imposed. He's defending the president's action by saying it'll bring the government $6 trillion. Well, if it brings it to the government, it's got to be taking it from the taxpayer. That's the people and the businesses of the United States. They're going to have $6 trillion less dollars in their pockets because of the revenue the tariffs will take from them. That's what I meant. The Republicans used to say, no, we're in favor of putting the money back in your pocket and not having the government take it. Here we have Mr. Navarro, apparently unaware of the 100 years of the political party he serves, that he's reversing everything that they ever said. Suddenly, it's better for the government to have those $6 trillion than to leave it in the hands of business and the people. What a remarkable thing to do. Number two, Mr. Trump and his $7 trillion. He rattled off this big company, that big company. It's only extra if you could, as he claims, Mr. Trump, if you can show that this is a new development in addition to what they had committed to before. But he didn't do that. And I'm going to tell you why. Because all those companies had made big commitments before in the normal course of business. Therefore, you'd have to know what portion of the number he quoted is anything new as opposed to recycling the old. I'll give you an example of how politicians play. When he told Mexico that he was going to deport unless they took steps to be more vigilant at the border, what did the woman, very smart woman, leader of Mexico, do? She said, well, okay, I'm going to put 15,000 troops on the border. No, Mr. Trump was very pleased. Only the New York Times, I think, or the Washington Post pointed out that she already had 10,000, and so her 15 was an additional 5, 3 of which had been already voted by their Congress earlier. In other words, she turned nothing into something, hoping he'd go away, which worked, at least for a few weeks or months.
Mm-hmm.
That's what's going on here. This is flimflam time. This is advertising mentality. You know, an advertiser has a client, and the job of the advertiser is to tell you everything real or imagined that's good about the product and tell you nothing about what its drawbacks are. And that makes for a very dishonest conversation. These guys, Navarro, Trump, they are real estate dealers, which is one step from advertisers. Their job is to show you the property, tell you everything good they can think to associate with that, and tell you nothing about the problem with termites or the mice or anything else that the property has. You know that, and that's why you have to hire somebody else to give you an honest estimate. We don't have somebody else in this situation. We sit there and watch the president all preened up in the garden rose room or whatever it's called, you know, showing what to the world? That we are a problematized economy, and we are going to try to muscle the rest of the world by whacking them, telling them they're the bad guy, and we're going to punish them, and that's how we're going to dig ourselves out of the economic hole we dug for ourselves. When he talks about bringing the factories back to America, think with me for a moment what that means. The factories were once in America, true enough, and they left, true enough. But why did they go? They went because it's more profitable. They tell you that. I mean, I study these things, but you don't have to spend time studying. Read their annual report. You'll see it listed there every year for every one of those companies. We could get away with paying lower wages. And by relocating to China, we were in the biggest, fastest growing market on this planet. And in business school, where I have taught, we teach people, go where the wages are low, go where the market is growing. Then you'll do well in your business. Okay, that's why they went. No one put a gun to their head. The Chinese had no way of forcing anything. The Chinese said, you can come here, you can hire our workers at a wage much lower than what you pay, and you'll be within our market and be able to sell here. And the company said, oh, goody, and that's why they went. And if you make them come back with a tariff, they're still going to come back to a country where they'll have to pay more in wages and where the market is neither so big nor growing so fast. That's going to hurt the profits of those companies, and they know it. And their hurt profits is not going to help the American economy. It's going to drag it down further. Mr. Trump is desperate. These are the policies of a desperate leader of a desperately troubled country. It reminds me of nothing so much, if you pardon my football metaphor, as a Hail Mary pass. You know, you're losing the game. It's the last minutes of the game. You tell all your receivers, go over there to the left corner of near the end zone. I'm going to heave the ball in that direction. It'll bounce around. Try to make it come down in your arms as opposed to somebody on the other team. It's no longer strategy. It's no longer design of a play. It's just sheer luck. If Mr. Trump pulls this out, it will be not anything to do with his plan. It has to do with pure luck, and I don't think the luck will be on his side.
One of my students asked me in class yesterday, so once these tariffs are imposed and Trump leaves office, and if the Democrats reverse the tariffs, how long will it take for the prices to readjust and come down?
They won't, and I'll tell you why they won't. If people, let me take a step back. For a factory to move is a matter of years and huge amounts of money.
Wait a minute, and let me jump in right there and say, one of the reasons why Trump's anti-globalization discussion won't really make any sense is because that incurring those costs just is crazy. It's crazy.
Right. That's so important. Put yourself, just imagine for a minute, you and I are corporate bigwigs, and we're thinking of, well, I'll give you a concrete example. You mentioned Nissan, comes back to my mind. If I'm not mistaken, both Nissan and Mitsubishi, two of the largest automobile companies in Japan and therefore in the world, have informed Mexico that the factories they had planned to build there, you know, just across the border from Texas, they're not going to go through now. Why? Are they building them somewhere else? No. They're not going to build them for the time being because it is impossible to calculate where to put them. Why? Because of Mr. Trump's tariffs. Not the tariff, but the fact that Mr. Trump has already shown, and he hasn't been in office even 3 months yet, he's already shown that a tariff at one level on one day was changed later that week to a higher one or a lower one. That makes the corporation's decision impossible. It makes no sense to spend years and billions moving factories, say, from Mexico into the US, or from Canada into the US, or from anywhere. And then to discover, after you've spent all that money, lost all that output over the time that you were moving your factory, that it ends up having been a bad decision because you didn't ever have to do it, since the tariffs were removed or lowered at some later point. That's why a recession is coming, because corporations are holding back from the plans they had. Every one of the things he listed, this company planning this investment in the US. What he didn't tell you was when. It's a plan, but they're not moving these companies because it would be stupid for them to do so. If this tariff is removed by Mr. Trump, or as you put it rightly, by Mr. Trump's successor, whoever that is, Republican, Democrat, Independent, then these companies are better off hunkering down, taking a hit for a year or two, because that'll be a much better decision than having upped their factory, spent all the money, taken the years, only to discover that given where things are in 2 or 3 years, the reverse move is on the agenda then. They're not doing that. That's not how corporations work. What Mr. Trump would have had to do is not the flimflam show for TV that these last 3 months have been. It would have been a very quiet, very sober, not in the rose garden, explaining, this is my program. I'm going to do these tariffs now, and I guarantee they will. But he can't do that because he wants to use the tariffs as a bargaining chip. You know, go to China, tell them I'll lower the tariff, which is enormous on them, over 50% now. I'll lower it if you give me TikTok. You know, in other words, he'll use it as a bargaining chip. But the minute he or his people said that, which they have said, every corporation said, oh my God, I'm not moving. He's cutting some deal around this tariff that I don't know about that will lead him to cut the tariff. I'm not going to. I'll be fired as the vice president for planning of this big company if I put the company through that. I'm not going to do it. I'm not going to recommend the move. I work with corporate people sometimes. I know how they think. As many of them will tell you, uncertainty is our biggest enemy. We can't move in an uncertain. We take enough risks as it is. We cannot add this crazy behavior. And then when you're looking at an administration that imposes a tariff, and then, you know, there's a joke going around. They impose tariff on islands whose main inhabitants are penguins, you know, then that's an example of, you know, we're not dealing with quiet, careful, sober bureaucrats, which is what you need here. You know, when you read an article, they deported a person who's a citizen or who's a perfectly well-documented immigrant when they said they wouldn't do it, then you understand that you got a lot of shoot from the hip cowboys here, and they don't know which way the bullets are going.
Well, and let me just add one more element. You talked about Trump talks about ending globalization, bringing the corporations back. So you have the cost of building these industrial plants, these manufacturing facilities. You do not have an industrial policy, which is something that people really need to understand. There is no industrial policy here. And when you look at why the corporations left in the first place, as you said, in search of lower wages so they can make more profit, well, when they come back, what's going to happen to the wages when they get here?
Exactly.
Or the way, go ahead.
No, I mean, bingo, you know, you won the game here. They went because the profits were better there. What he's doing is changing by imposing taxes so they come home and then would have to deal, if they ever did it, with the fact that the wages are higher here and that the market, look, General Motors sells more cars in China than it does here. I mean, people have to understand. We haven't even talked yet, Wilmer, about what is likely and almost certain to happen, which is what we call retaliation.
Mm-hmm.
You know, all the people in France or Germany or Italy, or for that matter, China or Japan or Brazil, they're watching their economic situation in trouble because the goods they send to the United States are being taxed and therefore more expensive for Americans to buy. That can hurt them. They're demanding that they be held, be compensated for this. They didn't do anything wrong. It's a foreign government that is hurting them. And they didn't do anything. So they're going to do what? Well, they can't hurt the United States government directly. They're going to go to their own government, the Brazilian government, the French government, the German government, which is already happening, by the way. And they're saying, okay, we want you to do a tariff or something else to the Americans that generates revenue for you that you will give us to compensate. And by the way, if they do that, which they will, that's one more reason for corporations to stay there, because they're going to get compensated by their governments over there for what the American government is doing. Did Mr. Trump have an answer for that? Not at all. He didn't say a word about retaliation. The Secretary of the Treasury, another winner, explained that the rest of the world should take a deep breath, I'm quoting,
Mm-hmm.
and not retaliate. And why not? Because that would mean, and he paused for effect, escalation. Wow. The man who just escalated trade war is suggesting to other people not to do what he just did because it might escalate. These people are in another world. They're not with us. They talk to each other, and all of this makes sense to them. They're very careful not to talk to critics like me and you and many others, so they don't have to deal with the obvious questions they would otherwise have to face, and for which, and I say this as a professor of the economics that has taught this material, they don't have answers. The literature doesn't answer the way they do because it wouldn't make sense.
This takes me back to an example some people may not remember. I want to say it was the George W. Bush administration. France decided it was not going to allow American beef into France because there's a law in France prohibiting the consumption of genetically modified meat.
Right.
And George Bush, or I guess the American agribusiness, they got all up in arms, and and Bush's response was talk about retaliation to impose I think a 1,000% tariff on Roquefort cheese because that comes from France.
Right.
And you could come to my house every day for 55 years and you won't find Roquefort cheese in my refrigerator. But anyway, that's just an example of the retaliatory effect, that the escalation effect that these types of trade wars impose. I want to go back to China for a minute, because again, we know that a huge part of the deindustrialization of America was to send the manufacturing to China. China took it gladly because they were in the process of trying to grow their middle class and they needed to give people jobs.
Absolutely.
And two things. One, we keep hearing that that one of the reasons why we're increasing these tariffs on China is because China doesn't play fair.
Yeah.
China has a managed economy, and China plays by the rules of China, which is, hey, we play by our rules, they play by their rules. The other accusation is they stole our technology. But what a lot of people don't realize is part of the deal that China cut, or one of the demands that China makes, when you come to our country and you want us to manufacture something for you, you have to divulge to us what it is.
Right.
And so there was no theft of technology. That's part of the deal you cut with China when you go to China to have them manufacture something for you. You have to show them the blueprint, and you have to do it willingly. Professor Wolff.
It's so important, Wilmer. I'm really glad that you brought it up. Two reactions to the first thing and then the second one. Let me give you a story that most Americans don't know about tit for tat tariffs. And this one goes back to the 1960s. The Europeans, or the French, I believe, are leading the way at that time too, were declining to import chickens for eating, chicken meat. And they argued that the reason is Americans, after you take the feathers off, there was a procedure, I still think it's in use, in which you douse the chicken without feathers into a chlorine solution. I don't remember exactly why you do that. Maybe it cleans it, or it's some final step with the feathers. And the Europeans didn't want chlorinated chicken. They made a big deal about it. And the response of the United States was to say, okay, we'll let you bar chlorinated chickens, but in return, we're slapping a tariff on pickup trucks. Americans don't know this story. The tariff was big, 25%. And what that meant was that no European producer at that time, not the Italian Fiat or the German VW, they could not produce a truck which would have to come to the United States. In other words, you make the truck, then you have to ship the truck across the ocean, and then you'd have to pay a 25% on top of it tax to the U.S. government. So what did that do? It gave a bonanza to Ford, GM, and Chrysler at the time. They realized, oh my, we can now raise the price of pickup trucks way more than we can raise the price of cars. The tariff on cars at that time was, I think, 2%. Didn't make any difference, basically.
And trucks are cheaper to manufacture.
Right. So what the American companies realized was, oh my God, we can make a profit, because the tariff on the European pickup truck, it was protectionism. It meant that the Americans could jack up the price just below the price of the European pickup truck plus that tariff. So they did. And that meant, how do we convince the Americans to stop buying cars and to buy pickup trucks? So began the so-called love affair between he-men and pickup trucks that we know is still with us all over the. It had nothing to do with the taste of American men for the, none of that. It was a completely constructed nonsense driven by profit. In other words, there we go. That's what tariffs do. You can do it here, you can do it there. But that's not what Mr. Trump has done. He wanted to go beyond what other leaders have done and do it the way he did it, the whole world, all at once. That is kind of crazy, has almost never been done, is a very strange way to go about it. And to do it all by yourself, no debates, no discussion, no meetings, no opportunity to consider alternative. Wow, that's a terrified government. It doesn't dare have a debate for fear where that might go, what other options might be put on the table, how they would have to then justify doing what they're doing rather than choosing the options. it's awful. And now, secondary, quickly on the technology. You're absolutely right. The Chinese were crystal clear. They said, if you come here, here's what we will give you: low-wage workers. And by the way, not just low wages, but very well educated, disciplined workers who know, how to get to work on time and who work hard and all of that. It's not just that they were inexpensive relative to America, but they were really pretty good workers, on a par with those here in the United States, or nearly so. And the second thing we'll give you, the Chinese said, is our market.
Mm-hmm.
We are a country 4 times larger than you are, and we now have a very rapidly growing middle class, which is going to buy your stuff, more of it than you have Americans able to buy your stuff, which has been true for many of the American companies. And here's what we ask in return. You must share your technology. And we understand if you don't want to do that, then, we don't have a deal, and, you go your way, I'll go my way. But nobody was in a position to force anyone. It was a deal that was made, and the American corporations jumped at the deal. They saw enormous profits, which they got. I want to remind people, one of the reasons the last 30 years have been particularly good in the stock market, leading people to not understand that you can also have 30 years where it isn't. But we had 30. Part of the reason for that is the extraordinary profits made in China by the American companies whose stock went through the roof. Apple being one of the great examples. There's no Apple without the fact, in case you're not familiar with it, that most of the Apple phones and other Apple devices are made in China.
Mm-hmm.
That's why yesterday on the stock market, Apple took a bigger hit than any of the other big high-tech companies, because it is, they're all somewhat dependent on China, but Apple is the outstanding one. It's just, by the way, the figure given by the stock exchange today is that $2 trillion were lost on value in the stock market overnight. That is between Wednesday night and today. So in those big figures that Mr. Navarro threw around, 6 trillion, a third of that's gone already. And who knows, it's just the flimflam that we are being subjected to is what people should think about. Nothing shows how much trouble the American economy is in than watching these flimflam artists do their best with smoke and mirrors to give you the idea they have a clue as to what to do.
Talk about what I think is some of the imbalanced impact that the country is going to feel from this. And what I mean by that is Donald Trump puts 10%, 15% on energy coming into the country from Canada. Well, that Canadian gas or that Canadian oil isn't burned in Florida. It's burned in the Midwest. That energy that comes from Canada, from what I understand,
right,
goes to the Midwest. It doesn't go to the West Coast.
Right.
The F-150 truck, the parts of that truck that are made in Canada, or the truck that is assembled in Canada, isn't sold in Texas. It's sold in the Midwest. So a lot of the folks, a lot of the MAGA folks, a lot of the Republican folks in Idaho, in Iowa, in Indiana, in South Dakota, and North Dakota, they're the ones that are about to get screwed from what's being done to Canada, more so than people on the East Coast or people on the West Coast. That's just one limited. Is there any validity to that?
Absolutely, there's no way to get out of it. Here's another irony for the people who think this is a great strategy somehow against China. If Canada can't sell its electricity in the United States without the tariff, and if Americans can't afford or will start economizing on electricity much more than they have because it's so expensive since it comes from Canada and therefore has the tariff on it, what are the Canadians going to do? The answer is sell their electricity to China. That's what's going to happen. Canada is, just as far from China as the United States. China needs energy. That's where they'll go. And I want to remind people, we're not in the end of the 20th century when the United States was the only superpower left standing after World War II. That era is gone. There's a huge economic powerhouse out there, not just China, but China and all its allies, the so-called BRICS. I want to remind people to keep in mind a statistic very simple. The 330 million Americans comprise 4.5% of the people on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
China and the BRICS taken together is more than half, over 50% of the people on this planet. Do you really think that we ought to be the bad boy in this situation, punishing and whacking all the others? Yeah, we have more wealth than many countries, but we don't have anything like the ratio of 4.5 to over 50. That's what we got. And in the long run, that's what's going to count. Unless we plan on literally extinguishing most of the people of the world so we can have it to ourselves. I think there's a level of self-delusion going on here that approaches the pathological.
I know you've committed to giving me till the top of the hour. Can you give me about an additional 15 or 20 minutes?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. So in fact, yesterday I had Dr. Radhika Desai on, and she was making the point that the consumption power of the United States has shifted, and that now the American consumer in terms of the world market is probably around 15 to 20% of global consumption. And I'm operating off the top of my head, so I may have that number slightly off. And so that now, as Donald Trump is imposing his tariff scheme on the rest of the world, that a number of countries will just say, you know what? Their response to this not only will be retaliatory tariffs, but it'll also be, well, what we'll do with our products, we'll expand our own domestic markets, and then we'll also sell it other places. United States, you're becoming less worth the hassle than you realize.
Yep, I agree, and that's only going to get more. That's been the trend for the last 25 years, and there's no reason to think it's going to change. Look, Mr. Trump doesn't understand, and I'm afraid most Americans don't. If you do this kind of behavior, you are forcing the rest of the world into an adversary position. Yesterday, 3 countries announced they're have already gotten together to coordinate their response to the tariffs. Those 3 countries are China, Japan, and South Korea. The three powerhouse economies of that part of the world, who have had a long history of trouble and tension and friction and, of course, war, that they can now get together. What the one thing that brought them now finally to overcome all their antipathy and actually sit down is to deal with the United States. European leaders are saying the same thing about Europe. we are becoming, and there's no nice way to say it, so I'm going to say it in plain old English. We are becoming what the rest of the world is looking at as a rogue nation, a particular nation breaking away from how the rest of the world does business, how the rest of the world understands free trade, mutual agreements, and all of that, going for number one, as Mr. Trump might say, is being now translated with these tariffs as we're going to make money for us at your expense, and don't you dare retaliate or do anything other than, slink your head away and accept it. The world isn't going to do it. And if they did it, they'd hate us for it. And that hatred has consequences. My God, in Canada, which sends us more tourists than any country on earth, the tourists aren't coming anymore.
Correct.
That hurts the economy. Ditto for the Mexicans. Ditto for the Europeans. You're going to see people looking for other ways. The Mexicans make wonderful avocados, but if they can't sell them in this country because they become too pricey, there's a lot of people in the world that haven't yet been introduced to a charming Mexican avocado, and that's what they will do. And the United States, as you rightly put it, can't stop that, and the rest of the world is one hell of a lot bigger with more money to spend than the United States. Mr. Trump acts like he's emperor of the world, but he isn't. So some of this bluster is becoming ridiculous.
Tony Blinken wrote a book a while back called Ally versus Ally, America, Europe, and the Siberian Pipeline Crisis. When you read this book, even though we're not talking about the Siberian Pipeline Crisis, the underlying premise explains a lot of the mindset that the United States has fallen victim of its own doing, and creating these tensions with its own allies. Look, and with its own allies, point one. But I want to go back to your point about China, Japan, and South Korea. Those folks were not getting along.
That's right.
And I'm being very kind when I say they weren't. The South Koreans hate the Japanese. I mean, hate the Japanese.
Right.
Like the Klan hates black people, or black people hate the Klan.
Right.
The South Koreans hate the Japanese, and they're not too fond of the Chinese either.
Right.
And so now you have these three diametrically opposed countries sitting down and saying, we got to figure out another scheme here, because we are all now being victimized by the same bully. During the Nixon administration, China and Russia did not get along.
Right.
To be kind, they did not get along. They are now, they've signed mutual defense pacts against who?
Yeah.
The United States. Look at, you've got Iranian grocery stores in Venezuela. Why? Because Iran and Venezuela understand they are in opposition. They are being victimized by the same bully.
Right.
This is a world readjustment that the United States isn't being victimized by. It's a world realignment that the United States has caused.
Look, I agree with you, but let's go way over to the other side. Let's assume, put aside the blame. Here is the Chinese playing a bit of the role in the world that the United States played when it was a much younger country. It's trying to grow. It's figured out a way to do it. It has been doing it now for several decades faster than anybody else on the world. What all of us ought to do, but we don't, is to take our hats and tip it off and say, wow, you were one. China was one of the poorest countries on the earth.
The sick man of Asia.
Yeah, and now
they call themselves.
Yeah, and now they're a superpower, challenging the United States, developing the most advanced technology step by step as well, or better than the United States in some cases. It's an amazing achievement and deserves respect and deserves study. Perhaps we could pick up a few good pointers that would help us if we did it. But instead, we see the United States putting its naval fleet in the South China Sea, getting all excited about the little offshore island of Taiwan and so on, provoking, hitting with tariffs, punishing the Huawei company, just penny ante stuff.
Kidnapping its CEO.
Yeah, that's right. And heading, therefore, towards conflict. A conflict of what kind? Again, I want to remind people, China has nuclear weapons. China's ally, Russia, has a lot of nuclear weapons. You put the two together, and they have a population 5 times what we have. And I'm not even talking about BRICS, just
China.
Just China and Russia.
Right.
What are you doing? What are you doing? The obvious better way is to sit down with the Chinese and bring in others. How can we organize world trade to give each of us room to grow and build up the standards of living of our people without stepping on each other so we don't provoke conflict? Come on. That was the dream of the League of Nations. That was the dream of the United Nations. We need it now. Or are we going to have another world war before we realize yet again that we need a way forward that does not involve doing exactly the kind of provocative, dangerous action that Mr. Trump did?
What do you say to those theorists a while back that were discussing these economic developments were really designed to create a tripartite or a trilateral government, that you had the West, you had Europe, you had Asia, that the ultimate design here was this global order managed by those 3 elements of the financial system?
Well, I always thought it was, a place to start. You might do that. I didn't like the exclusion of Latin America and Africa from this strange idea. It sounded to me like the Europeans were able finally to look beyond Europe and notice that there was Asia and America, but Jesus, where's the rest of the world? So I didn't like it a little bit for that reason. But mostly what I didn't like was it was so abstract. The reality is today, and this is a whole nother conversation that we might want to have sometime, for 1,000 years, maybe for 2,000 years, the world center was Europe. Europe was where the Greek civilization, Roman civilization, then the medieval time, then modernity, then the colonial takeover of the world. Europe. For the first time, Europe is now not just playing second fiddle, it's playing 8th fiddle or 9th fiddle. It's just no major technological breakthrough happens there. It either happens in Silicon Valley or it happens in China. The Europeans are late to the party. The European economic growth is pathetic. China's is the best. The United States is a distant second, and the European horse, is out of sight. It's so far back. They're not. Germany, which used to be their quote unquote powerhouse, is running a recession over the last several quarters,
Mm-hmm.
declining. It just had to rearm itself, which ought to scare the pants off people, given what German rearmament has been in the past. They're rearming themselves because there's no other way they can get their economy going again, because what they produce, nobody's buying anymore. And after these tariffs, they just lost much of their American market. So they're going to be building weapons, just what the world doesn't need, in order to keep their economy going, because they'll have a revolution at home if they don't. So Europe is a disaster. It can't hold up its corner. If there were a three-cornered game, they're out of that game. They're so destroyed by their disunity. They haven't figured out that the United States is a large country. Russia is a large country. China is a large country. You break up into little ones, you got to get a lot of agreement among different governments. They haven't been able to do that in Europe. They can't do it now. Several governments don't support the war in Ukraine the way most of them do. And it's on and on. And the United States, if they do retaliate, I can tell you exactly what's going to happen. The United States will start picking off one after another, playing them one against the other. The disunity will rise up, and the United States will be able to avoid having any real pushback from them. China, of course, they can't do that, but they can do it with Europe, and that's Europe's disunity. I mean, Britain solved its problems, which are almost as bad as those of the U.S., by Brexit, by blaming Europe, breaking away from Europe, which has been a disaster for the British economy, which is in just horrible shape, and not good for Europe either. We blame the Chinese, they blame the European. Notice something. Looking at home to yourself, asking what changes you can make, doesn't seem to occur to these genius leaders, but they're all real quick pointing the finger at someone else. If it weren't so dangerous, it would deserve the name childish.
So you've given the very succinct analysis of the decline of European empires. You've just published a piece. We are now, and we've been talking about this for a while, we are now, I described, in fact, when I came to New York and to the event that you hosted, and I spoke about, we've seen this movie before.
Right.
And now, not only are we watching the movie, we are in the movie as well. I compared it to the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Right.
So talk about now the decline of the American empire, because that's what we, in all of this discussion, that's really getting to the crux of where we are. This is a empire in decline, and as we've heard the African proverb, the kicks of the dying mule can be the most dangerous.
Yeah, it's there's a lot of wisdom in that remark. And I always hesitate, because often my American audiences, and let me remind everyone, I was born in Youngstown, Ohio. I've lived and worked in the United States and nowhere else all my life. I am an American, proud to be one, but I also believe in looking honestly at the situation we're in.
Mm-hmm.
So let's start. In Vietnam, let's go back, 1975, the Vietnam War. The enemy of the United States was the Communist Party of Vietnam. We fought a war, we lost. And ever since then, the government of Vietnam has been the Communist Party of Vietnam, the people who defeated us. That's the truth. The rest is make-believe. More recently, we fought a war against something called the Taliban in Afghanistan. They won, we lost. Who runs the country now? The Taliban. All right? Crystal clear. Then there's Iraq. Now there's Ukraine, which we are also losing. It's a clue if an empire keeps fighting and losing that something is going wrong. We don't need to be ashamed of it. Every empire in the history of the world went up and then it went down. That's why we don't talk anymore about the Greek Empire, the Roman Empire, the Persian Empire, the Turkish Empire, and so on. Empires go up and then they go down. The ride up is much more pleasant than the ride down. That's like remembering about that mule and the last kicks it can manage. The trick to know is when it's happening, why it's happening, and to figure out what to do about it. It doesn't have to be a decline into disaster. It can be, it has been sometimes, but not always. You know, when the United States broke away from Britain back in the War of 1776, and then the war that came a few years later, 1812, twice the British tried to keep us inside their empire. Twice we defeated them, and they learned their lesson, and we never had another war with Britain since 1812. A bit of an achievement, don't you think? 200 years plus. Why in heaven's name do we not learn and sit down with the Chinese and try to work out something comparable? They're the up-and-comer. They are. You have to face it. They came from nowhere. What's that called in racing? The dark horse comes from the distance and beats everybody else. They're the dark horse. We are the over-the-hill empire. We have 4.5% of the world's people. They have many times that, and they're now equalizing us in high tech and all the rest. It's past time to sit down. And what do we have instead? Bravado, bluster. We're hitting you with what is this? This is a disaster. This is a huge mistake, which risks a really bad further decline. Let me do it in economics, though. It's very clear. We were once, our currency, the dollar, was once the universal currency that everybody used. Just as before us, during the time of the British Empire, it was the pound sterling that everybody used. Well, 20 years ago, US dollars were 80% or more of central bank reserves around the world. Today, they're 40%. I mean, there's no ambiguity here. Other currencies are becoming more and more important as the dollar becomes less. It's still an important currency. We're not at zero. We still have a big enough hand, if you like, to use the card playing metaphor. We still have good cards in our hand, but they're not the cards we once had. And other people have good hands too. So let's use that. No, we don't. So the dollar keeps declining. I'll give you another example. High tech. We thought we were the leader in artificial intelligence. And then a few weeks ago, the Chinese, a little startup there, teaching America, China has lots of startup companies. That communist regime hasn't stifled creativity or entrepreneurship or none of that nonsense that keeps being said in this country as it tries to console itself about what things like the DeepSeek and so on show us. The best electric cars and trucks in the world right now, highest in quality, lowest in price, are made by the BYD Corporation in China. And the only reason my American audiences don't know anything about it is because there are no BYD trucks or cars on the road. There are in Europe, they're in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America, just not here. And why might that be? Because Mr. Biden took the 27.5% tariff that Trump put on the Chinese vehicles in his presidency, Mr. Biden raised it to 100%. Don't you believe it? 100% just on electric vehicles from China. So everybody else in the world can buy the best electric car at the lowest price. But no American company and no American consumer can enjoy that. And I could go on and on. Look, we have time. We are not in the dumps yet, but we're heading there. And what Mr. Trump just did, that's not going to stop the process. If anything, it's going to speed it up, and that's dangerous for everybody.
We're not in the dumps yet, but I can smell the stench of the dumpster. Basically, I can. What I hope or think will be the final question. It is the mass displacement patterns of people. When we look at the atrocities going on right now in Palestine and the displacement of Palestinians, we look at the horrific policy that the United States has implemented in Haiti, displacement of people. There's all this screaming about immigrants, but there's very little discussion. We talk about and complain about the people coming here, but we never seem to ask the question, why? Maybe this influx of Mexicans had something to do with NAFTA and the United States decimating Mexican agriculture. We just had Dole Foods convicted in Florida, of a superior court in Florida, for backing death squads in Colombia. We don't talk about how the United States, through its foreign policy, decimates economies, forcing people to find other places to live. Dr. Wolff.
Let me give you what I believe is by far the biggest and worst example, and to conclude by showing you how it is a mounting threat to the United States now that Mr. Trump needs to hide. We are in a process now, if Mr. Trump is to be believed, of deporting millions of undocumented folks here in the United States back to Mexico and other countries in Central America. And I'm an economist. Let me explain what that means. These millions of people are being sent into economies that do not have jobs for them. No way for them to earn an income other than to lean on their families and neighborhoods who are already in economic difficulty. But that's just the beginning. Those millions who are being deported had jobs in the United States, the overwhelming majority.
Mm-hmm.
And they took a portion of their income to pay their taxes to the U.S. government, and they took another portion of their income here and sent it back to their home country. It's what economics calls remittances. So not only are millions of workers going into Central America where there are no jobs, but it turns out that the remittances were between 15 and 40% of the GDP of those countries. These were crucial to the economics of what were poor countries. Those are over now. There are no remittances because those people have been rounded up by ICE and sent home. No jobs for more people looking, and no remittances. But we're still not done. They now face tariffs from Mr. Trump. Whatever those poor countries could produce, the big market for them was up north in the United States. That market just got more difficult for them because of the tariff that is being imposed on them. So that's called a 1, 2, 3 punch. People returning for whom there's no work, remittances drying up upon which the economy depended, and trouble in their export markets. Any one of those things would cripple those economies. All through is nothing short of a catastrophe. And I make you a prediction. I don't believe in predictions, but based on what I've just told you, I make you a prediction that ought to make you worried. We are in the process of confronting millions of people in Central America with a fundamental choice. You can stay where you are and you will die. Or you can brave the opposition and invade the United States. Only this will be a real invasion, not the one Mr. Trump drummed up to run for office. Because you're putting people in an there's no point in not trying to get up into the United States if you're going to die in any case if you don't. And I mean die. These are countries which will have trouble feeding themselves, which will have no health service whatsoever, who will be dying of diseases we know how to prevent, I mean, it's beyond words. It's beyond the horror of Gaza. We may be replicating it here.
And this is the final question. First of all, let me say thank you, because this, I believe, looking at the numbers, is one of the highest viewed shows live that I've done. To those of you that are watching this on X, if you could please subscribe to the show on YouTube. You will do us a tremendous service and enable us to continue providing this type of content. But we need you to subscribe to the show that you're watching on X. We need you to subscribe to the show on YouTube. Final question for you, Professor Wolff. You and I, before the show started, were talking about people being afraid. We were talking about people asking, do I need to leave the country and go elsewhere? We talked about people being just flat out frustrated and dealing with anxiety from watching the news. What is the message of Professor Richard Wolff to people that are feeling that sense of dread and are being consumed by anxiety?
Well, in many ways, it's the $1 million question. Here's how I would make an answer for that question as best I can. I'll do it with a historical example. In 1929, our capitalist economic system crashed. Still the worst crash in the history of capitalism, although the 2008 and 2020 crashes are close seconds. In any case, between 1929, when the crash happened in October, and 1932-33, people were in shock. They didn't know what to think or what to do. Nobody had prepared them that the capitalist system could even do so badly so quickly. No one had figured out what to do about it. So you had the floundering government, Herbert Hoover at the time, and so on, until Roosevelt came in. But it was a year or 2 or 3 before people kind of figured out, yeah, this really is very serious. Yeah, this isn't going away. This isn't a quick, bad but quick downturn. No, this is a long, drawn out. And then the American people did something which still gives me hope. They rose up in a way that is fundamentally progressive. And here's what I mean. Millions joined the Congress of Industrial Organizations, the CIO, the union movement. These were people who had never been in a union before. These were people whose parents had never been in a union. They understood that banding together with other working class people was a way to save themselves, to get through this. It's like a community hit by a flood or a tornado can sometimes come together in a beautiful way that everyone will look back on as a very special moment when they overcame the things that kept them apart and really became a community. We did. And we formed those three political parties, dare I say so, the two socialist parties and the Communist Party that worked closely with the CIO. And in short order, from 1933 to 1938, let me remind everyone, we got the Social Security system that would help every family in America take care of its elderly. It was a spectacular thing. Amazing we never had it before. We got it at a bad time when people were frightened and anxious about the future. If you're not familiar with John Steinbeck's great book, The Grapes of Wrath, take a look at it. It'll give you an insight into how upset people were. And then we passed the first minimum wage in those years. And then we established the unemployment compensation system at the federal level in those years. And then we gave government jobs, 15 million of them. Let me just hammer at that. In a difficult time, we gave people jobs. In today's difficult time, Elon Musk takes a chainsaw to take people's jobs away. I mean, we could do differently and better than we're doing now if we had the courage. We had it back in the 1930s, and we got unbelievable things that we still treasure, like Social Security, like the minimum wage, like inadequate that they are. It's a hell of a lot better than not having them. Now let's make the next progressive move. I think that's the best hope. I think we have a better chance for ourselves, our fellow Americans, our children, trying to break through to organize another New Deal than we have in moving to other countries, even as I watch people around me. Of course, I won't mention names, but I am now becoming aware of a growing number, in my case, fellow academics, people who teach school, or high school or college, who are seriously thinking about obtaining citizenship in other places or utilizing family connections to help them. I mean, it's a terrible sign of how bad things have gotten, but it's another clue to what we ought to be doing.
And I know of academics from your alma mater, Yale, that are leaving this country and taking positions at universities in Canada and taking positions at other universities. Final point, and this is the final point. When you look at these town hall meetings, many now that Mike Johnson has asked his conference to no longer have because the optics for them are just so horrific. You hear a lot of people saying, a lot of MAGA people saying, "Wait a minute, I didn't vote for this." They're at the town halls and they're screaming at their Republican representatives saying, "I didn't vote for this." What they're actually saying to me, what I hear when they say that is, "This wasn't supposed to happen to me. You weren't supposed to do this to me," because they're losing their jobs. Their wives are losing their jobs. Their children are losing their jobs. Final answer, and then, sir, I'll thank you and we will end this conversation.
You know, I'm an economist, and I've always been saddened by what a low level of literacy in economics we manage. It's not the fault of the people. It's the fault of an educational system that either cannot or will not teach basic economic literacy to our people. But I think they fell for it. They fell for Mr. Trump's promises. He was going to end the war in a week and he was going to fix the economy in 2 weeks. So all of this playing on their anxieties and fears by presenting himself as Mr. Fix-It.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and now they're realizing that his way of fixing it is screwing them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and partly, you know, he didn't level with people, so it's not their fault. It's a much more his fault for presenting himself in this advertising mode. Here's all the wonderful things I can do, and don't worry, there'll be nothing terrible I will do. Even now, I have to explain to audiences, if you fire tens of thousands, or maybe now even hundreds of thousands of federal employees, what do you think they're going to do? In order to earn an income, they're going to have to get a job. And they're going to look for the job in the private sector, because obviously the federal government isn't hiring, it's firing. And if a huge number of people suddenly descend on the private sector, well, then that's going to enable employers in the private sector to offer them jobs at lower wages than they're paying now, at poorer conditions than they are now giving their work. This is bad news for the entire working class. The fact that he covers it over with the nonsense about efficiency. No one ever brought efficiency to a bureaucracy by wholesale firing. To do it properly, you bring in specialists who study what's going on and come up with suggestions for how to get efficient. This wholesale battle axe, or if you like, chainsaw approach, is just for TV. It has nothing to do with efficiency. They don't want to spend money, so they don't have to raise taxes on corporations and the rich. That's the story. That's the truth of it. But it's hurting the entire working class. And it's going to continue, just like the inflation that's coming, just like these rising costs for all the imported goods. I'd like to remind you, when you get up in the morning, most of those people watching or listening, you have a cup of coffee. Maybe you put some sugar in it. Coffee is imported, the tariff applies. Sugar is imported, the tariff applies. I could go on and on. It's going to get you from all sides. And then you'll be stuck with a president who never told you seriously what he was going to do in terms of what it would mean for you. Instead, just as he did in the Rose Garden yesterday, he tells you what he's going to do and then tells you of all the wonderful things that will flow from this. Don't be fooled. This is the same flimflam that when you see an ad on TV for a bar of soap and the speaker says to you, just get this soap. Not only will it keep you clean, but it'll improve your sex life 100%. Yeah, you giggle. When Mr. Trump talks about the effect of tariffs, giggling is what's in order.
Professor Richard Wolff, I'm going to start a campaign to nominate you to win the Nobel Prize in economics.
Okay, that's very kind, but I have a piece of advice for you, Wilmer Leon. Do not hold your breath.
Well, the effort will be sincere, and
Okay.
you can't win it if we don't start.
Right, absolutely.
Thank
It
you
is. Let me be in kind, not just because you were kind to me. This is a very important program, what you do here. You really go into the questions. You don't shy away. You're not interested in a 30-second soundbite. And you ask the hard questions about the urgent issues. There's so little of it and so much of it that's needed. So my hat off to you. And I hope people sign up for your YouTube, because the more people can interact with you, the better we'll all be.
Well, you're very kind, sir. And it's guests like yourself that make this program what it is. I greatly, greatly appreciate it. Again, thank you, thank you, Thank you.
Okay, doke, and we'll do it again.
Looking forward to it. Looking forward to it. Thank you, folks. Just a couple of things before we get out. Professor Wolff and I spent a lot of time today talking about the MAGA people, talking about the Republicans, and talking about how they have become the party against their own interests. That for one of their mantras has been they're the anti-tax party. And what Donald Trump has just implemented, and what we will find hitting us on the 5th, are nothing but taxes. Taxes, taxes, taxes. They claim to be the party of less government. But when the government wants to come into your bedroom, and when the government wants to follow you into the examination room, as they now want to do with doing away with Roe v. Wade through the Dobbs decision, and they want to follow women into the examination room, and they want to come into your kitchen as you have to sit around the table and talk to your significant other about what to do with this pregnancy, all those kinds of things. They've flipped the script. Now, on the abortion issue, or on the woman's right to choose issue, which is where I think the argument should be framed, it shouldn't be framed as an abortion discussion. It's a woman's right to choose. They have been co-opted by so-called Christian nationalists in this country, and they have been championing this Dobbs or anti-Roe discussion in order to placate and in order to pander to the Christian right. The government should not be involved in this issue. This issue is a discussion between a woman, her doctor, and the significant other that provided 50% of the process to create the child in the first place. Again, the Republicans have touted, have proclaimed, they have held themselves out as the anti-tax party. And what has Donald Trump just done? Created a tax scheme called a tariff that he is going to impose. As Professor Wolff said, when you sit down tomorrow morning and you sit there with your cup of coffee, that cup of coffee, remember, was handpicked by Juan Valdez in Colombia and his lovely mule. There's going to be a tariff on that coffee. Even though it's Folgers, even though it's Maxwell House, good to the last drop. That coffee wasn't grown in Iowa. I was getting ready to confuse Iowa and Idaho. That coffee, those beans were not grown next to potatoes in Idaho. That coffee was not grown in New Mexico. It was grown in Old Mexico. That coffee comes from Colombia. It comes from Africa. It comes from other South American countries. We don't grow coffee in the United States, as far as I know. And if we do, we damn sure don't grow it in significant enough quantities to meet the needs of the American market. That coffee was grown in Kenya. So, thank you, Multi-Tom Tom. So, make note of that. All of that to say this. The fault does not lie in the Republican Party. The fault does not lie in the lapse of Republicans. We have a two-party system. And some of the blame that you want to put on the Republicans also falls at the feet of the Democrats. Why? Because they're offering you nothing. As a party, they're offering you nothing. What is their response to Donald Trump? It's Donald Trump is evil. Donald Trump is stupid. Donald Trump, all of which is true. Donald Trump is ignorant, all of which is true. But what tangible policies are they offering as a party? Bernie Sanders, to his credit, has submitted or had talked about proposing legislation to do away with the Social Security tax ceiling. Brilliant idea. I've been saying it for 15 years. You pass that, and you're able to improve benefits, make Social Security sustainable for some ungodly number of years out, and you're able to lower the retirement age in the United States. It's a brilliant idea. It's a very simple idea. All you have to do is remove the $160,000 ceiling or whatever it is on your Social Security tax, remove that ceiling. Everybody that gets a paycheck, whether it's $10 or whether it's $10 million in salary, pays the Social Security tax. Makes perfect sense. But the Democrats don't want to be seen as there they go again, those tax and spend Democrats. Well, what are the Republicans doing now? Raising your taxes. Even though you will see commercials, if you watch television, you will see commercials. They usually run in the morning when the national news is on in the morning, and they usually run in the evening when the national news is, and they're talking about saving Donald Trump's tax cuts. We have to save Donald Trump's tax cuts. Oh, Americans got $1,300 back in their pockets during the first Trump administration. Well, what did Elon Musk get through the Donald Trump taxes? What tax breaks did Donald Trump get from the he got a hell of a lot more than $1,300. A hell of a lot more than $1,300. But they waved that little trinket in front of you, pay attention to the trinket. You are getting sleepy. You are getting sleepy. Pay attention to the trinket. Vote for Donald Trump. You are getting sleepy. Vote for Donald Trump. Why? So you can get screwed. But the Democrats aren't offering that whole thing that Cory Booker did on Tuesday, that 25-hour longest speech in the history of the Senate. To his credit, kudos to Cory Booker. Great accomplishment. But what did it offer? Nothing. What did it offer? I know what he said. What did he offer? What solutions did he provide? Zero. Nada. He was right. We are in a moral crisis in this country. He's absolutely right. We are in a moral crisis in this country. Yes, as Professor Wolff said, Americans need to coalesce. Americans need to stand up and fight. Absolutely right. But, Senator Booker, you can't be selective in your morality. You can't be selective in your ire. You cannot come before the American people and talk about the moral crisis that has beset this country and not say a mumbling word about genocide in Palestine that is being paid for with American tax dollars. You lose the moral high ground. You lose the moral authority in your argument when you clutch your pearls. Senator Booker, you clutch your pearls. You cry crocodile tears about the moral imperative, and you didn't say a damn thing about genocide. But you took $750,000 from AIPAC. So it seemed, did they buy your silence for $750,000? Is that all it took? So if I go in my pocket, Cory Booker, and I offer you $751,000, would you oppose genocide in Gaza, inflicted upon the Palestinians by the Zionist settler colonial state known as Israel? If I pay you $750,001, Cory Booker, since it seems as though your voice and your morality and your ire is for sale, does it go to the highest bidder? Because if that's what it takes to get you to alert the American people about the genocide being inflicted upon the Palestinians, I'll find a way to pay it. Anyway, folks, this, I believe, is the largest live viewing of the show to date. And hang on. Newsflash coming in. Everything in the dollar store and a huge portion of goods sold on Amazon come from China. Rising tariffs on Chinese imports and others like steel, cars, tequila. I don't drink tequila. I drink bourbon. And I also drink vodka. Whiskey from countries like Mexico, Canada, and France. How is this going to impact everyday Americans? You're going to pay more for everything. Are we risking serious economic blowback by trying to go it alone on trade? Absolutely. We are not. It's not a matter of are we risking blowback. You will reap the whirlwinds of blowback. You will pay more for your tequila. You will pay more for your gin if you drink Hendrick's gin, which is very good gin, by the way. If you drink Hendrick's or Beefeater or Tanqueray, you will pay more for it. You will pay. Kevin Baptiste, thank you for that $5 super sticker. Thank you. And let me, and folks, before y'all go, there are no tariffs on contributing to this show. There are no, this is a no tariff zone. So Kevin, thank you for that $5 super sticker. There's no tariff imposed upon you, Kevin, for making that very generous contribution. All of you, I need you to know, watching this program and contributing your hard-earned dollars to this program are greatly, greatly appreciated. And I will not, I promise you, I commit to you, I will not impose a tariff. Cherie, thank you. She's now given $20. Kevin, I'm telling you, partner, when I come back to Oakland, here's the thing, Kevin, here's what I'm gonna do for you. The next time I come home, as in Oakland, I'm gonna take you to dinner. You and me and Ray, and I'll take you all to dinner. Yes, I have a lot on my mind every day, Zal. I have a lot on my mind every damn day. I don't have enough time in the day to articulate it. So folks, no tariffs here. If you subscribe, those of you that are watching on X, if you would please subscribe on YouTube, I will not impose a tariff upon you. Okay? Cherie, you included. Cherie, thank you for that $20 super sticker. There is no tariff imposed upon you. This is tariff-free zone. So anyway, my point about earlier is very simple. It's a two-party system. Both parties are to blame. Both parties are to blame. I'll say this and then I'm out. The other problem with what Cory Booker demonstrated in the Senate, again, kudos to him for doing what he did. But what he also did was exposed the Democrats for what they're not doing. Why was it April 2nd or April 1st? And the Democrats are just getting to what he did. Why did it take that long? And by the way, not supported by the Democratic Party. Bernie's raising or removing the Social Security ceiling, not supported by the party. Bernie is out there as a lone soldier. AOC is out there as a lone soldier. For all intents and purposes, even though Chuck Schumer did, chuckle and ask Cory Booker a question, not supported by the party. But I'm supposed to vote for a Democrat because I'm black and because a black woman was running, who, by the way, supports genocide. In fact, she just posted this picture on Facebook of her standing in her office having met with who? Like the top 5 people in AIPAC. Kamala, you showed us your hand. You showed us your cards. And they all got G's on them for genocide. How am I supposed to support that? That's my red line. Genocide is my red line. Violating international law is my red line. I don't know where y'all's is, but that's where mine is. So again, as I'm wrapping this up, AOC, a lone soldier, you sure about that? I am. Because who else in the party? She's standing next to Bernie. Who else in the party is standing behind her? That's my point, Dr. Nick, is that she's out there on the stump for all intents and purposes by herself. Parmila Jayapal in Washington State, as she's doing this great campaign about grassroots organizing and getting more people involved across party lines, that's a great move by her. But have you heard, in fact, I can't even remember, what's the guy's name? The head of the DNC chair, Rick something. Is he out there with Ken Martin? This is my point. When Bernie was having his anti-oligarchy tour, was Ken Martin with him as the new chair of the party? No. As AOC was standing next to Bernie on the stage, was Ken Martin standing next to her? No. As Pramila Jayapal has been hosting her Zoom events, promoting grassroots organizing, was Ken Martin on those calls? No. That's what I mean when I say they're operating as lone soldiers. They're out there as individuals. I don't hear the party hierarchy, the party leadership standing with them. Are the Dems leftists? If you're talking about as a party, hell no. They're corporatists. They're paid by the same benefactors such as Lockheed Martin, Boeing, McDonnell Douglas, Raytheon, APAC. They're all paid by the same benefactors. They ain't nothing left about them, and there's nothing left in them. They are vacuous. They are devoid of zero. That's why Kamala Harris had nothing to offer you in terms of substantive policy when she was on the campaign trail. And that's why when Donald Trump won in November, the Democrats had no immediate response to that butt whooping. That's why you had Hakeem Jeffries on national television going, "What are we supposed to do? What are we supposed to do? We don't know what to do. We're still doing the autopsy. We're waiting to see the data. Please, spare me. Spare me. Please." But what did Corey do? He talked for 25 hours. Jamie, he talked for 25 hours, but didn't do anything, just like Tuxedo Mask from Sailor Moon. Okay, I'm not hip to the film, but okay. You're right. So I could go on, but I'll come back on tomorrow. Again, biggest show, I think, to date. A lot of you are watching on X. Those of you that are, please go to YouTube and subscribe on YouTube. That is the only way we will be able to sustain this mission. We do it for you, but we cannot do it without you. And again, I will impose no tariffs upon you for making your contributions. With that being said, again, got to thank Professor Wolff for joining me today. Thank you all so much for listening to and for subscribing to and for contributing to Connecting the Dots with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Stay tuned. I will see you all tomorrow. Chairman Omali Yeshitela will join us tomorrow, and we're going to be talking about the attacks on the First Amendment, the attacks on individual thought, the interest in deporting. Really quickly. Final, I think I said this yesterday, but I got to keep making this point. So now they've deported all of these folks to Guatemala, to El Salvador. Many of them Venezuelans. There's a man in Maryland that was caught up in that whole scheme, legal resident of the country, here legally. They deported him to El Salvador. He's now languishing in the prison in El Salvador, guilty of zero. In fact, I can tell you, everybody on that plane I know was guilty of zero, because you are presumed innocent until proven guilty, and they were all deported without due process. And it's that without due process point that should be very, very important to everybody watching this show, because I believe, and this is my opinion, but I don't think I'm wrong, it's the lack of due process piece of this that should be so important to y'all, because I think this was a trial balloon move by the Trump administration. If he can get away with deporting those immigrants without due process, he can send you to El Salvador without due process as well. Tell me I'm wrong and prove it. Chairman Omali Yeshitela will join us tomorrow. Please follow and subscribe on YouTube. Leave a review, share the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below in the show description. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter. and we don't chatter here on Connecting the Dots. See y'all tomorrow. Until then, enjoy the rest of your day and evening. I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, wonderful remainder of your day. Peace. I'm out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.